Music floated beneath the vaulted ceilings like spun silver, each violin note gliding through the golden haze of candlelight that bathed the grand ballroom of Ashbourne House. London's highest society had gathered beneath its glittering chandeliers, their laughter soft and refined, their conversations wrapped in polite smiles and sharpened curiosity. Yet beneath the fragrance of roses and polished civility, something sharper traveled from group to group, whispers, delicate and poisonous, spoken just softly enough to pretend kindness. At the center of those murmurs stood Miss Eleanor Whitcomb. She moved through the room with careful grace, her pale blue gown brushing the marble floor like a quiet tide, her posture upright despite the eyes that followed her. Eleanor had once been admired for her gentle composure and thoughtful wit. Tonight she was admired for something else entirely, the spectacle of her fall. A fortnight earlier, her engagement to the charming Mr. Adrian Hale had ended abruptly, and society had already decided the simplest explanation. He had abandoned her. What greater failure could be imagined for a lady than to be publicly rejected? A cluster of matrons near the orchestra lowered their voices as Eleanor passed, though not quite enough to spare her ears. So unfortunate, one murmured. Such a sweet girl, but clearly not quite suitable. Men do not break engagements without cause, another replied gently, which in London was the cruelest accusation of all. Eleanor heard them. She heard everything. Yet she kept walking, her gloved hands lightly clasped, her chin lifted with a dignity so fragile it seemed almost luminous. For humiliation, when borne with grace, could resemble courage. Across the ballroom, Adrian Hale watched her. He leaned against a column with the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied admiration. Tall, impeccably dressed, and blessed with a smile that suggested charm rather than calculation, he appeared the perfect gentleman. Those who observed him tonight saw only a wronged fiancé forced to withdraw from an unfortunate engagement. Only Eleanor knew the truth that hid behind his pleasant eyes. He had debts, vast ones. Debts he had intended to solve through marriage. When Eleanor had discovered the truth, she had refused to become the silent accomplice to his deception. Her refusal had shattered their engagement overnight, though Adrian had carefully ensured the scandal would fall entirely upon her. Now his gaze followed her like a tightening snare. Eleanor felt it even before she turned. When their eyes met across the room, Adrian lifted his glass slightly, the gesture polite enough to satisfy observers, yet something cold flickered beneath it, a warning disguised as courtesy. Her pulse tightened. The orchestra began a waltz, and couples glided onto the floor, skirts swirling like drifting clouds beneath the chandeliers. Eleanor remained near the edge of the room, aware that no one would ask her to dance tonight. Rejection, once whispered loudly enough, could clear a circle around a woman as effectively as illness. Then Adrian crossed the floor toward her. He moved with leisurely confidence, pausing occasionally to greet acquaintances, smiling warmly as though nothing in the world troubled him. Yet when he reached her side, the warmth vanished from his voice entirely. "Miss Whitcomb," he said quietly, "how admirable your composure appears this evening." Eleanor did not look at him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Hale. London seems most concerned about you," he continued, his tone smooth as polished glass. "One hates to see speculation grow so imaginative." Her gaze lifted then, calm but unyielding. "Speculation often thrives where truth is unwelcome." Adrian's smile thinned. "You mistake the situation," he murmured. "Truth is precisely what I wish to restore." She already knew what he intended. "Restore it how?" she asked softly. "By correcting your unfortunate stubbornness," he replied. "You will publicly reconcile with me tonight. A brief announcement, perhaps a dance together. Society will forgive everything. And if I decline?" The flicker in his eyes hardened into steel. "Then I fear," he said, lowering his voice further, "that certain details of your conduct during our engagement may become rather difficult to ignore." The threat landed exactly where he intended. Not violence. Not rage. Something worse, ruin. Eleanor felt the air thin around her, yet she refused to let fear show in her expression. "You would destroy my reputation to protect your own," she said. "My dear Eleanor," Adrian replied softly, "reputation is the only currency that matters here." For a moment the music, the laughter, the golden chandeliers all seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet cruelty between them. Then Eleanor stepped back. "No," she said simply. Adrian's pleasant mask fractured. "You will regret that answer." His hand reached for her wrist. The gesture was small, almost invisible to the watching crowd, yet the force behind it carried unmistakable command. Eleanor pulled free at once. And fled. She moved quickly through the corridors beyond the ballroom, past flickering wall sconces and tall windows that reflected her pale face as she passed. Behind her came Adrian's footsteps, swift and relentless, his voice echoing sharply through the hallway. "Eleanor. Stop." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Guess what here? Servants would see. If he cornered her. The thought alone pushed her forward. At the end of the corridor she saw a door slightly ajar. Without pausing to think, she rushed inside and closed it behind her, pressing her back against the polished wood as she struggled to steady her breathing. The room was dimly lit by a single fire burning low in the hearth. A bedchamber. Warm shadows stretched across the walls, the scent of cedar and smoke lingering in the air. For one fragile moment, Eleanor believed she had escaped. Then a quiet voice spoke from the far side of the room. "Madam, you appear to have entered my chamber in considerable haste." She turned. A tall figure stepped from the shadows beside the fireplace, the amber glow revealing a composed face framed by dark hair and thoughtful eyes. Even in the uncertain light, Eleanor recognized him instantly. His Grace, Duke Alexander Ravenscroft. And before she could speak, the door handle behind her began to turn. The brass handle turned slowly, its faint scrape against the latch echoing in the quiet chamber like a warning bell. Eleanor Whitcomb felt her pulse surge into her throat. Behind that door waited Adrian Hale and the ruin he carried with him, a ruin that would multiply tenfold if he discovered her alone in a gentleman's bedchamber. No explanation would survive the telling. London did not seek truth when scandal offered greater entertainment. For one suspended moment she could not move. Across the room, the tall figure near the hearth observed her with calm attention. The Duke of Ravenscroft had not stepped closer, nor had he demanded explanation. He merely watched, the firelight shaping the planes of his face, his dark coat and waistcoat lending him the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command without raising his voice. The door rattled again. "Eleanor," Adrian called from the corridor, his voice sharp with forced patience. "I know you are inside." Her breath caught. Ravenscroft crossed the room, then each step measured, the polished floor barely sounding beneath his boots. When he reached her, he did not ask permission before placing one gloved hand over the latch. "Miss Whitcomb," he said softly, "if you trust me even slightly, step away from the door." His tone carried neither urgency nor doubt. It was the voice of a man who expected to be obeyed. And strangely, Eleanor obeyed. She moved aside just as the door pushed inward. Adrian Hale entered without waiting for invitation, his expression already sharpened by irritation. The moment his gaze fell upon the Duke, however, the anger vanished as swiftly as a candle extinguished by wind. "Your Grace," he said, bowing quickly. Ravenscroft regarded him with mild curiosity. "Mr. Hale. You appear to be pursuing someone through private corridors with admirable determination." Adrian straightened, recovering his composure with impressive speed. "A misunderstanding, I assure you. Miss Whitcomb and I were engaged in a private discussion." "Indeed." The single word carried enough quiet skepticism to chill the room. Adrian's eyes flicked toward Eleanor. Miss Whitcomb became distressed. "I can imagine why," the Duke replied evenly. Adrian hesitated, as though weighing the danger of further argument. Few men would willingly challenge Ravenscroft. His reputation was carved from equal parts wealth, influence, and an unsettling reputation for patience. "Well," Adrian said at last, smoothing his coat, "I would not wish to intrude upon your Grace's privacy." A wise instinct. The Duke held the door open. Adrian's gaze lingered on Eleanor for one final second, a promise of future reckoning burning behind his polite smile. Then he stepped back into the corridor. The door closed with a quiet, final click. Silence settled across the chamber like falling snow. Eleanor remained where she stood, trembling faintly despite the warmth of the fire. The enormity of what had nearly happened pressed heavily upon her thoughts. Adrian had seen her here. Servants might have seen him chase her. Already the fragile threads of gossip would be tightening. "Sit," the Duke said gently. She looked at him in surprise. His tone had softened, losing the iron edge it carried before Adrian. He gestured toward a small chair near the hearth, its velvet cushion glowing softly in the amber light. "You appear in need of steadier breathing," he added. Eleanor lowered herself into the chair before she could protest. The heat of the fire slowly seeped into her chilled hands. "You have my gratitude," she said quietly. "Though I fear you may regret your intervention." "Regret is rarely useful," Ravenscroft replied. He poured a small measure of brandy into a glass and set it beside her. The gesture was simple, yet careful, as though he understood that dignity was the one possession she still fiercely guarded. "You know Mr. Hale well," he said after a moment. "Better than I wish." His gaze rested on her thoughtfully. "He pursued you with unusual persistence." Eleanor considered her answer. Silence would protect Adrian. Truth would protect herself. "Mr. Hale dislikes losing control," she said at last. The Duke seemed unsurprised. Men of that temperament often confuse affection with ownership. Eleanor studied him, curious despite her anxiety. His voice carried neither gossip nor judgment, only quiet understanding. "Why did you help me?" she asked. He regarded the fire for a moment before answering. "Because fear is rarely mistaken when I see it." His reply was simple, yet something in the way he said it suggested deeper experience. Outside the chamber, distant music drifted faintly from the ballroom below, a cheerful waltz utterly unaware of the tension unfolding in the quiet room above. Eleanor finished the brandy slowly, the warmth steadying her thoughts. "You should return to the ball, Your Grace," she said finally. "My presence here already risks enough speculation." He gave a faint, almost amused smile. "My presence here risks exactly the same." Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Not Adrian this time. A servant's voice followed. "Your Grace, several guests are asking after Miss Whitcomb." Eleanor's stomach tightened. The gossip had already begun. Ravenscroft moved toward the window, drawing the curtain aside just enough to observe the dark garden beyond. Then he turned back to her. "Miss Whitcomb," he said thoughtfully, "London will invent whatever story entertains it most." She rose slowly. "Then perhaps I should give them none at all." "On the contrary," he replied. From a small table near the bed, he picked up a single white camellia resting in a vase. The delicate flower gleamed softly against the dark green leaves. He offered it to her. "If society insists upon a story," the Duke said calmly, "we may as well choose one worth telling." Eleanor stared at the camellia in astonishment. Because in London, a gentleman giving a lady such a flower carried only one meaning. And somewhere beyond the chamber walls, the whispers of scandal were already beginning to bloom. Morning arrived in London with a pale, hesitant light that slipped between the tall windows of Whitcomb House and settled gently across the drawing-room carpet. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb stood beside the window, the white camellia resting lightly in her gloved hand, its delicate petals still perfect despite the restless night she had endured. Outside, carriage wheels rattled along the cobbled street, and distant voices of vendors rose through the cool spring air. The city moved as it always did, unbothered, indifferent, and quietly observant. Yet Eleanor knew that somewhere within those bustling streets, whispers about her had already begun their careful journey through society. She had returned home shortly after midnight, escorted not by the Duke himself, but by one of his trusted servants, who delivered her safely to her family's door with impeccable discretion. Even so, discretion rarely outran imagination. Servants spoke to other servants, and gossip traveled faster than any carriage. Her fingers tightened slightly around the camellia. It had been a simple gesture, offered with calm certainty, yet it carried the weight of 100 interpretations. In London's intricate language of flowers, the white camellia meant admiration, quiet, respectful, and unmistakably intentional. But admiration from a duke could become something far more dangerous than kindness. A soft knock sounded at the drawing-room door. "Miss Whitcomb?" her maid called gently. "A messenger has arrived." Eleanor turned. "A messenger?" "Yes, miss. From Ravenscroft House." The name stirred an uneasy warmth in her chest. "Send him in." Moments later, a young footman entered carrying a small silver tray upon which rested a neatly sealed envelope. The wax bore the unmistakable crest of the Duke of Ravenscroft, a raven poised mid-flight against a shield. Eleanor dismissed the servant and broke the seal. Inside lay a brief note written in precise, steady script. "Miss Whitcomb. Society has already begun composing a story about last evening. It would be discourteous to let them finish it without assistance. Should you find yourself inclined for fresh air this afternoon, my carriage will be waiting in Hyde Park at 4. Ravenscroft." Eleanor read the note twice. It was not quite an invitation, nor quite a command. Yet something about the phrasing suggested the Duke understood precisely how London's machinery of scandal worked. He was not avoiding the whispers. He was stepping directly into them. That afternoon, clouds drifted lazily across a soft blue sky as Eleanor's carriage rolled slowly toward Hyde Park. The air carried the faint scent of budding trees and damp earth, while riders and elegant carriages moved along the broad gravel paths in carefully choreographed displays of social presence. To appear here was to be seen. To be seen was to shape reputation. As Eleanor stepped down from her carriage, she spotted the Duke almost immediately. Ravenscroft stood beside a sleek black horse near the path's edge, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably commanding. Several passers-by had already noticed him, their curious glances shifting subtly toward Eleanor as she approached. He removed his hat with courteous precision. "Miss Whitcomb. Your Grace." For a moment they simply regarded one another beneath the soft rustle of spring leaves. "You anticipated that I might come," she said. "I anticipated that you would understand the alternative," he replied. "And the alternative would be? That society writes your story without you." His calm honesty left little room for argument. They began walking slowly along the path, their pace unhurried, their conversation quiet enough to appear ordinary to passing observers. Yet Eleanor could feel the attention of nearby riders and strolling couples drifting toward them like invisible threads. "You realize what they will say," she murmured. "They are already saying it. That I spent the night in your chambers." "Yes. And you seem entirely unconcerned." Ravenscroft glanced toward a cluster of ladies whispering behind delicate parasols. "Concerned, Miss Whitcomb," he said thoughtfully, "is not the same as intimidated." Eleanor studied his expression. "You are protecting me," she said. "I am correcting an injustice. Those are not always the same thing." "No," he admitted quietly. They continued walking until the crowds thinned and the park opened into a quieter stretch where tall trees cast long shadows across the grass. Ravenscroft stopped. "There is something you should know," he said. Eleanor sensed a shift in his tone, subtle yet significant. "Mr. Hale visited my residence this morning." Her breath caught. "What did he want?" "To warn me," the Duke replied calmly. "He claims you possess knowledge capable of ruining him." Eleanor's silence confirmed the truth. "And do you?" Ravenscroft asked gently. "Yes." "What kind of knowledge?" "The kind men bury beneath marriages." For the first time since she had met him, something sharp flickered in the Duke's eyes. "Debts?" he asked. "Yes." "Fraud?" "Something worse," she said quietly. A faint breeze stirred the branches above them, scattering soft shadows across the ground. Ravenscroft studied her with growing seriousness. "Then Mr. Hale's interest in reclaiming you becomes clearer." "He does not want reconciliation," Eleanor said. "He wants silence. And he believes intimidation will achieve it." She met his gaze directly. It nearly did. A long moment passed between them, filled only with the distant rhythm of carriage wheels along the park road. Then Ravenscroft spoke again, his voice lower now. "My sister once faced a similar predicament." Eleanor had not expected that. "She trusted a man who valued reputation more than honor," he continued. "Society believed him. She never recovered from the humiliation." The quiet grief beneath his words made Eleanor's chest tighten. "I am sorry," she said softly. "So was I," he replied. His gaze shifted toward the open parkland, where sunlight flickered through the trees like scattered gold. "And I do not intend to witness such injustice again." The words were not dramatic. They were simply certain. For the first time since the scandal began, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath her fear. Hope. Yet hope could be dangerous. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "helping me may place you in conflict with Mr. Hale. That possibility has occurred to me. He is not a man who retreats easily. Neither am I." Their eyes met again. And in that quiet exchange something subtle shifted between them, an understanding forming in the space where necessity and admiration quietly overlapped. Then Ravenscroft added one final sentence. "And if Mr. Hale believes last night was the end of this matter," the Duke said calmly, "he is about to discover it was only the beginning." Evening descended upon London with a silken hush, and the great ballroom of Ashbourne House shimmered once more beneath 1,000 trembling lights. Chandeliers burned like captured constellations above the polished marble floor, scattering warm reflections across silk gowns and black coats as society gathered again within its glittering walls. Music drifted from the orchestra, light and elegant, yet beneath its melody a different rhythm pulsed through the room, the quiet anticipation of spectacle. Word of the previous night had traveled swiftly. Miss Eleanor Whitcomb had fled the ballroom. Mr. Adrian Hale had pursued her. And somehow, mysteriously, the Duke of Ravenscroft had become involved. No one possessed the full story, yet that had never hindered London's enthusiasm for invention. Clusters of guests lingered near the edges of the room, their conversations dipped in curiosity. Parasols tilted, fans fluttered, and discreet glances turned toward the entrance every few moments. They were waiting. Eleanor felt the weight of those expectations the moment her carriage arrived. As she stepped from it beneath the lantern glow outside Ashbourne House, the cool night air brushed her cheeks, steadying her nerves. Tonight she wore a gown of soft ivory silk, simple yet striking, its elegance chosen carefully, not to dazzle but to endure scrutiny. Her reputation already hung by a fragile thread. Yet retreat would only tighten the noose. Inside, the music swelled gently as she entered the ballroom. Conversations softened, then resumed with greater intensity, like ripples spreading across still water. Some faces displayed sympathy. Others concealed eager fascination. And across the room Adrian Hale watched her. He stood near the grand staircase, immaculate as ever, though something restless lingered in the sharp set of his shoulders. His gaze followed Eleanor with unmistakable purpose. But he was not the only one watching. Near the far side of the ballroom, Duke Alexander Ravenscroft stood beside a tall window, the dark line of his coat cutting a commanding silhouette against the candlelit glass. His expression remained calm, though his eyes sharpened slightly when Eleanor entered. For one quiet moment their gazes met across the crowded room. It was not a dramatic exchange. No gesture. No signal. Yet Eleanor felt a steadying certainty pass between them, as though an invisible line had drawn itself through the crowd. Then Adrian began moving toward her. He crossed the floor with deliberate grace, smiling politely to acquaintances who greeted him along the way. To those observing, he appeared merely a gentleman approaching a former fiancée with courteous intent. Only Eleanor saw the anger burning beneath the surface. "Miss Whitcomb," he said when he reached her. "Mr. Hale." Their voices remained calm, yet the tension between them hummed like a drawn wire. "You seem remarkably composed this evening," Adrian observed. "Appearances often demand effort," she replied. His smile sharpened slightly. "Indeed they do." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that their conversation blended with the surrounding music. "I believe you have been entertaining influential company," he murmured. "I believe you have been spreading stories," she answered quietly. Adrian's eyes flickered with annoyance. "Stories require witnesses. And accusations require proof." His patience snapped. "Very well," he said softly. "Let us discuss proof." Before Eleanor could respond, Adrian straightened and raised his voice just enough to carry across the nearby guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced lightly, "it appears Miss Whitcomb and I have a matter requiring clarification." The surrounding conversations faltered. Fans stilled. Music continued, but attention shifted like a tide turning. Eleanor felt the trap closing. Adrian gestured toward her with theatrical politeness. "Perhaps Miss Whitcomb would care to explain where she spent the latter portion of last evening," he said smoothly. A ripple of shocked whispers moved through the room. The question itself was indecent. And yet its implication was devastatingly clear. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears. If she denied it, Adrian would accuse her of lying. If she confirmed it, society would destroy her. Adrian watched her carefully, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. "Surely," he continued, "the truth cannot be so difficult to share." Silence stretched across the ballroom. Then a calm voice cut through it. "It is not difficult at all." The crowd parted slightly as Duke Ravenscroft stepped forward. His presence seemed to shift the atmosphere instantly, as though authority itself had entered the room. Conversation ceased entirely now, every eye turning toward him. Adrian's confident smile faltered for the briefest moment. "Your Grace," he said stiffly. Ravenscroft's gaze rested on him with quiet intensity. "You appear very eager to discuss Miss Whitcomb's movements," the Duke observed. "I merely wish to defend my reputation. A noble ambition." The Duke stepped beside Eleanor, his posture relaxed yet unmistakably protective. "Miss Whitcomb entered my private chambers last evening," he said clearly. Gasps fluttered through the crowd like startled birds. Adrian's triumph returned instantly. "I thought as much." But Ravenscroft continued before he could speak further. "She did so," the Duke added calmly, "because she was being pursued through the corridors by a gentleman who seemed unable to respect her refusal." The room shifted again. Now the whispers turned toward Adrian. His expression hardened. "You imply misconduct." "I imply persistence," Ravenscroft replied evenly. "An unfortunate quality when directed toward a lady attempting to leave one's company." Adrian's voice rose slightly. "And yet she remained in your chambers." "For approximately 3 minutes," the Duke said, "during which time I dismissed the gentleman pursuing her." A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the crowd. Adrian flushed. You expect society to believe such a convenient account? Ravenscroft regarded him steadily. I expect society to observe which version of events requires the least imagination. The words landed like a quiet verdict. Adrian's composure finally cracked. You defend her very passionately, Your Grace, he snapped. Ravenscroft turned then, meeting Eleanor's gaze for a brief moment before speaking again. Passion has little to do with it, he said calmly. Then his voice lowered, carrying across the silent ballroom with quiet certainty. However, he continued, my regard for Miss Whitcomb has become increasingly difficult to ignore. A stunned hush fell over the room. Even Eleanor felt her breath catch. The Duke faced the gathered crowd without hesitation. And should further clarification be required, he added, I will gladly provide it. Adrian stared at him, realization dawning slowly. Clarification? He demanded. Ravenscroft's gaze did not waver. Yes. The Duke turned fully toward Eleanor. And in the breathless silence of the ballroom, he said quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. Miss Whitcomb, if society insists upon binding your reputation to mine, perhaps we should give them reason they cannot question. For a long, suspended moment, the ballroom forgot how to breathe. The orchestra's music faltered into a hesitant murmur, bows hovering uncertainly above strings, while the 100 glittering candles overhead seemed to burn with unnatural stillness. Every gaze in the room fixed upon the quiet space between Duke Alexander Ravenscroft and Miss Eleanor Whitcomb. Adrian Hale stood rigid a few steps away, his expression caught between disbelief and rising fury. But Ravenscroft did not look at him. The Duke's attention remained entirely upon Eleanor. Miss Whitcomb, he said, his voice calm yet unmistakably deliberate, London has already decided that our reputations are entangled. I see little benefit in pretending otherwise. A murmur stirred through the gathered guests. Eleanor felt the weight of every eye pressing upon her shoulders. For weeks she had endured whispers, suspicion, and the suffocating assumption that her dignity could be bartered away by any man clever enough to shape a rumor. Yet the man standing before her was not bargaining. He was offering something far more dangerous. Her voice remained steady when she spoke. And what precisely are you suggesting, Your Grace? Ravenscroft's expression softened, though the strength behind it did not waver. That society will continue speaking regardless of our silence, he said quietly. Therefore I propose we answer them plainly. Adrian let out a short, bitter laugh. You intend to rescue her reputation by sacrificing your own? He scoffed. The Duke turned his gaze toward him at last. My reputation, Ravenscroft replied calmly, has survived far worse than honesty. The word struck Adrian like a slap. Eleanor studied the Duke's face carefully, searching for hesitation or calculation. She found neither. There was no theatrical gallantry in his posture, no desperate attempt to appear noble before an audience. Instead she saw something steadier. Respect. You scarcely know me, she said softly. I know enough. And what is that? That you refused a man who attempted to control your silence, he answered. That alone suggests remarkable judgment. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the nearby guests. Adrian's face flushed deeper. You mistake stubbornness for virtue, he snapped. Ravenscroft's gaze returned to him with cool patience. No, the Duke replied. I mistake nothing. The tension thickened until the air itself seemed reluctant to move. Then Eleanor spoke again. You realize what you are offering, she said to the Duke. If you bind your name to mine, every whisper surrounding me becomes yours. I am aware. You would invite scandal. I prefer truth. The simple conviction in his voice struck deeper than any grand declaration. For the first time since the nightmare began, Eleanor felt the fragile balance of power shift. Adrian's threats, once so suffocating, suddenly seemed smaller beneath the calm authority of the man beside her. But Ravenscroft had not yet spoken the final words. Miss Whitcomb, he said quietly, I would not presume to decide your future for you. If you wish to walk away from this moment, I will defend your name regardless. The ballroom remained utterly silent. Even Adrian seemed frozen now, as though sensing the ground beneath his carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble. Eleanor felt her heart beating steadily against her ribs. The word echoed again within her thoughts. For months she had been reacting, defending, retreating, surviving the expectations and manipulations of others. Now for the first time the decision rested entirely in her hands. She lifted her chin slightly. Mr. Hale, she said calmly. Adrian looked at her with narrowed eyes. You have spent weeks suggesting that my reputation depends upon your approval, she continued. You implied that silence was the only path left to me. His jaw tightened. And now, he demanded. Now I realize something rather liberating. She turned fully toward him. I do not require your protection. The words echoed through the room with quiet finality. Adrian's temper finally erupted. You ungrateful little fool, he hissed. Do you imagine this man will shield you forever? Ravenscroft stepped forward before Eleanor could answer. Mr. Hale, he said evenly, your persistence has become tiresome. Adrian glared at him. You cannot intimidate me with rank alone. No, the Duke agreed calmly. But perhaps facts may prove more persuasive. From the inside pocket of his coat, Ravenscroft withdrew a folded document. I believe these belong to you, he said. Adrian's eyes flicked toward the paper, confusion shifting quickly into alarm. Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately. Financial ledgers. Proof of the debts Adrian had hidden. You see, Ravenscroft continued, your attempts to secure Miss Whitcomb's silence were unfortunately noticed by others. A murmur of shock spread through the crowd. Adrian's composure collapsed. You have no right. I have every right, the Duke interrupted calmly, when a gentleman's conduct begins to resemble extortion. The accusation struck like thunder. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances, their sympathy shifting rapidly. Adrian's voice faltered. You would destroy me over this woman? Ravenscroft's expression hardened slightly. You misunderstand, he said. Your actions accomplished that quite thoroughly on their own. For a moment Adrian seemed ready to argue further. Then he saw the room. The watching faces. The sudden distance forming around him. Without another word, he turned sharply and pushed through the crowd, disappearing into the corridor beyond the ballroom. Silence lingered after his departure. Then slowly conversations resumed, softer now, thoughtful rather than cruel. Eleanor felt the tension drain from her shoulders like a storm finally passing. But the Duke had not moved. He still stood beside her. Still waiting. Well, he said quietly, that concludes one difficulty. She looked at him, unable to suppress a small, incredulous smile. You appear remarkably calm for a man who has just dismantled a scandal in the middle of a ballroom. I prefer efficient solutions. And what of the other difficulty? His brow lifted slightly. Which one? The fact that half of London now believes you intend to marry me. Ravenscroft regarded her thoughtfully. Half. At least. He considered that for a moment. Then perhaps London deserves clarity. Eleanor felt her breath catch. The Duke turned toward her fully now, his voice low enough that only she could hear. When I first encountered you in that chamber, he said, I believed I was merely preventing a moment of injustice. And now? Now, he replied quietly, I suspect fate was considerably more ambitious. For a moment neither of them spoke. The music had begun again behind them, soft violins weaving through the air like distant echoes. You are offering a great deal, Your Grace, Eleanor said. Only what you choose to accept. And if I refuse? His expression did not change. Then I will continue defending your name with exactly the same enthusiasm. The answer made something warm and steady bloom inside her chest. For the first time since their strange encounter began, she realized something simple. He was not trying to save her. He was standing beside her. And that difference meant everything. Eleanor took a slow breath. Very well, she said softly. Ravenscroft waited. If London insists on telling stories, she continued, we may as well give them one worth remembering. A faint smile touched the corner of the Duke's mouth. An excellent philosophy. He extended his arm. Miss Whitcomb, would you care to begin with a dance? She placed her hand upon his sleeve. The orchestra swelled gently as they stepped onto the polished floor together. Around them, the whispers of scandal began transforming into something entirely different. And as the first notes of the waltz carried them forward beneath the golden chandeliers, Eleanor realized that the night she had fled in fear had quietly become the beginning of something neither gossip nor reputation could ever fully contain.